Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming out so we can have our election tonight. It will be official. I'm Ron Sorrow, president of the Linfield Historical Society. And at tonight's meeting, I'll tell you, first we're going to do some shout outs to people who deserve praise. Then we're going to do the election of our officers. Then I'm going to give a programs review so we can remember the programs we had this year. Then I'm going to have a couple tributes to some people who passed away. And then we have a special guest tonight who has a journal, is a relative of Thomas Townsend, and has a journal that was written long ago describing the events. And then we'll have our pie and some music. So, let's start. The first thing I want to do is do the shout-outs. So we've got Janet with the Hospitality Committee and all the crew who provided refreshments all year for us. Chris's Bake Sale Committee and her crew of bakers who did bake sales for the Friends of the Library. We've got Helen Breen, who handled the publicity for the papers again so beautifully and volunteered to do it again next year, which is a big help because she's the best and she deals with the papers great. Linda, who always does everything anyway, so I'm not going to list everything Linda does, but Shelley for recording the meeting minutes and posting them where we will always be able to find them. Mark Ingaciola on the Programs Committee for booking the talent. And then there's the Revolution 250 Committee, which planned and executed one of the best celebrations this society has ever had. Diane, Ace, Linda, Shelley, Chris, Kathy, Bob, Erline, and most of all, Alan for chairing the whole thing and being the driving force behind it all. Alan and Ace for making those wonderful videos so we can remember that celebration forever and what we achieved. So let's do the election first, and this is basically going to be meet the new boss, same as the old boss. I don't think there's going to be any changes unless somebody wants to nominate someone from the floor. And one thing I would like to, right now Roy is listed as our historian. He used to be listed as our archivist. I would like to change that back to archivist because the description in the bylaws is basically for an archivist. And I would like to make Alan Foles the official historian of the society, and we'll make that a committee head position. Okay, so if you have artifacts questions, we'll always go to Roy because he knows the collection we have in storage, and Alan really knows all the history of Linfield, so any history problems will go to Alan. So I'm going to have Alan come up right now, and we'll do the election. Okay?
Oh, there we go. Hello, everyone. All right, welcome to our election. We have a few positions that are annually elected. It's president, first vice president, second vice president, treasurer, secretary, and, historian, which is going to be the archivist. And then we have one of the three at-large board members also up for re-election this year. And I believe everybody is up for re-election. So for president, we have one nominee right now, Ron Sorrow. Do we have any further nominations? Not appearing. All those in favor of Ron Sorrow for president, please raise your hand. And those opposed, and... Congratulations, I guess. Okay, our first vice president is Diane Foles. And she's also our sole nominee, unless there are others. None appearing. All those in favor of Diane for our first vice president, raise your hand. Those opposed, congratulations, Diane. Second vice president is Janet Everson. She's our nominee. Any further nominations? None appearing. All those in favor of Janet, raise your hand. And those opposed, congratulations, Janet. Treasurer is Bob Gillen, and Bob Gillen is also the sole nominee right now, unless we have further nominations. Not appearing. All those in favor of Bob, raise your hand. Those opposed, Bob has been re-elected. And our secretary is Shelley, and she's our sole nominee, unless we have someone else. Not appearing. All those in favor of Shelley, please raise your hand. And those opposed? Congratulations, Shelley. Now, we have 3 board positions that are each 3-year term, but one of them comes up each year. So right now, it's Diane Ruby's position is up for re-election right now. All those in favor, are there any other nominations? None appearing. All those in favor of Diane, please raise your hand. And those opposed, and Diane Ruby has been re-elected. Also on the board, I can read this now. I did it in red.
Fran,
Oh,
not just Fran, Kathy.
Fran and Kathy are already on the board, and their terms don't come up until next year and the year after. And then Linda Gillen, as past president, is automatically on the board as well. So you have a board for 2025.
Congratulations. Linda, I just remember one thing we forgot. We didn't get the raffle ready, so we want to raffle off an Images of America Linfield book tonight. I'm not sure how we do that. We'll figure something out. Okay, so why don't I do my presentation? This is called my year in review. So the very first thing we had this year was Trails and Sails. So Trails and Sails is a program of the Essex National Heritage Area, and we partnered with them. It's 2 free weeks of events. Everybody, you should look this up, and you should get a booklet, and you should go to all these events. It's just amazing. They have all these free events, just like our programs, but everything's free, and there's walks and kayak tours and all kinds of things, history things. So we partnered with them, and we did 2 programs for them this year. The first program was our Partridge Island, Henfield House, Rombold's Grove walk and talk. So this is me, my daughter, my friend. This is us on our Partridge Island walk, down the boardwalk, and we told the story of the Native Americans who were here first, the first settlers who came, and how it got named that way and all that. And then this is the Henfield House over here, and Linda did a talk there. This is her house, and she gave us a history of that. And then she went across the street and she did the history of Rombold's Grove. The next Trails and Sails event we had was our fall hike at the Callenberg Quarry Skull Cliff. And that was a talk on the graffiti artist who changed the Callenberg Quarry, the old quarry, into a work of art. So that was a lot of fun. Nobody got hurt, I don't think. Maybe not this year, that was nice. Then we had our potluck supper, and that was fun. Then let's see. Okay, so our first program of the year was called Seen by Sea, an Appreciation of the New England Coast. And writer, sailor, and outdoor adventurer Allison O'Leary was the guest speaker. Allison described her 5-week sailing excursion with her partner John Pike from Providence, Rhode Island to Bar Harbor, Maine. They traveled in a 25-foot Catalina sailboat that she described as something like camping at sea. The trip provided a unique view of the rugged 700-mile coast that also included an encounter with sharks. So if you remember that story, she ended up showing us the video of the shark flopping around in their boat. Their lifeboat basically is an inflatable that they drag behind them, and it chewed it all up, and they tried to get some guy to fix it, and they went for days trying to fix it, and it was no good. Anyway, that was a fun story. Okay, then the next, so in November we had a talk called The Salem Witch Trials and 17th Century Law. Rachel Christ Doan, Director of Education at the Salem Witch Museum, was the guest speaker. She described the legal and political backdrop against which the Salem witch trials played out in 1692. The Massachusetts Bay Colony had lost its royal charter a decade earlier because of its refusal to comply with the civil and business dictums of the Crown. The new charter of 1691 seriously curbed the power of the Puritan clergy and magistrates under whose watch the witchcraft madness in Salem had begun. In the summer of 1692, 19 victims were executed. Newly arrived Royal Governor Sir William Phipps was shocked at the Salem proceedings, especially after his own wife was accused. He established a court that immediately dismissed spectral evidence testimony from witnesses that the accused persons had appeared to them in dreams or visions to do them harm. By the fall of the year, the hysteria had died down and the prisoners were released. Okay, the next thing we did was the country store. So Linda and Bob hosted it at their house again. And it was the ham and bean dinners with all the fixings, cheddar cheese, poinsettias, greens. The dessert this year was wonderfully decorated gingerbread and sugar cookies.
Who made them?
Ace. I was going to say Ace, but if I got that wrong, I didn't know she would by herself. Ace made them. They were so good I couldn't eat them. So I had my daughter glaze them, and I put them up in the attic, and hopefully the chipmunks won't eat them in the meantime, and I'll have them again next year for decorations. And then in February we had Linfield resident and author Tom Dalton was the guest speaker. In the 1840s, Jesse Hutchinson purchased several acres of farm on High Rock, a rocky summit in Lynn with wide open views. He and his extended family lived there until the beginning of the 20th century. 4 of his younger siblings formed a successful singing group that Jesse managed. The singers performed nationally protesting slavery and later supporting women's suffrage here and abroad. They enjoyed international fame, appearing with abolitionist Frederick Douglass and entertaining President Lincoln. A stone cottage built by the Hutchinson family still stands on the site. An adjacent observation tower was burned down by revelers at the end of the Civil War. The family later bequeathed the parcel to the city of Lynn. In 1905, the present Romanesque High Rock Tower was erected on the property that became a city park for the public to enjoy. Speaker Tom Dalton became interested in the story of the Hutchinson family singers when researching his book Frederick Douglass, The Lynn Years. Okay, the next event we partnered with the Danvers Historical Society, and they have a wonderful hall, Tapley Hall, which they own themselves. And we had a hootenanny over there where we played Irish music and told history of the Irish songs. My family members, along with my friends from the open mic, which we call ourselves the Tapley Players, we play once a month over there at the Danvers Historical Society. We served some fake Guinness, was served in tiny Guinness glasses, and our hospitality crew served up a wonderful spread. So thanks to them again for making that a great time. Okay, the last program of the year, before the big event, was Skeletons in the Closet, the memorialization of George Jacobs Sr. and Rebecca Nurse after the 1692 witch trials. So local author Dan Gagnon was our guest speaker. Dan presented us with a talk based on an article he had written for the New England Journal of History in the fall of 2019 called Skeletons in the Closet, How the Actions of the Salem Witch Trials Victims' Families in 1692 Affected Later Memorialization. Dan discussed the differences between how Rebecca Nurse was memorialized compared to how fellow victim of witchcraft mania George Jacobs Sr. So I found this, I had seen Dan do this talk before, and I found it very interesting because George Jacobs, he's the only one we have any kind of remains for. And we only have them because this is his house, and his house is up in Danversport. If you know where Sunnyside Bowling is, it's the neighborhood behind there, and it stood there for a long time. You can see it was 1935. It was still there, but in bad shape. And they had buried his body on the property at the end of a fence somewhere in here, and it had been dug up and buried again, and then they didn't tell the new owners that it was there, and a bulldozer dug it up again, and the bones got put in a box. They brought to someone's living room and sat under the dining room table until the help decided they didn't want the bones there anymore. They wouldn't work there. So it was just a very interesting of how these bones had traveled through time. And they finally ended up over at the Rebecca Nurse house, and they have a cemetery in the Rebecca Nurse house. And that's his grave there. It's, it's a modern grave, but it's made to look old-fashioned. And he's the only one that we have, his bones buried anyway. So now the big event. So our big event this year was Shadows of 1775, an original play written by Diane and Alan Foles and wonderfully played by a band of volunteers, and it really was the most fun. We got Helen to read the poem, and it really went off spectacularly. So there's a video out there on our YouTube page. Everybody should go watch that. It was a lot of fun. That will give you the true history of what happened to the Patriots who came from Linfield on that day. The next day, we had Patriots Day on the Common. And again, it was just a number of events, which I'll go through, but I wanted to give Fig his own slide here because he really was the star of the show. And it was just great to have him come running in, yelling, you know, stand to your arms, the regulars are out. So anyway, that was a great time. These are just pictures of what went on during the day. It started with Pat over there in the library reading the Midnight Ride of Paul Revere to some youngsters there who made some tricorn hats for themselves, and we gave them little flags. And then I led a parade of the kids over to the Common, and it was led by a fife and drum. And then Alan gave the story of Captain Bancroft's company and the mustering on the Common and the marching off to Monotony. And then our little band of patriots marched off to Monotony, led by Fig and by the fife and drum. And then while we were around the corner, we were firing cap guns, but nobody could hear it until Dave fired the real musket. And while we were doing that, Alan was back on stage telling the story of the Jason Russell house where the men from Linfield got killed and many men from Danvers got killed. So again, we had Martin Herrick arrive calling and mustering of the militia and marching off. Then when the militia came back, that's like this picture here. We came back and we went over to the memorial, the Veterans Memorial, and over by the Revolutionary War plaque. And we did what's called a Mourn Arms. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. And this is a picture of the Mourn Arms, which is a very sad event. And then Bob played the bugle. He got behind the wall there, played taps for us. Then we had Bruce Siegel address the crowd, and he gave a nice little address to the crowd. So just to point people out, this is the fife and drum we got. We hired them. And then standing behind them are these two. This is Daniel Townsend Muse, and this is Anthony Wellman, and they are both descendants from the Patriots who went off on that day. This is Roy and Alan Iden, and they are playing, let's see, Roy played Thomas Townsend, and Alan played Martin Herrick. And then, let's see, this is Dave Bjorkman and his daughter, Elissa, who did a wonderful job singing when we were doing the Mourn Arms. She sang a verse from The Parting Glass. This is Shelley, who helped out, handing out things and dressed in costume. This is Dave McKenna from the Danvers Historical Society, and he came with a real musket. He's a member of the Danvers Alarm Company. So he taught us how to load a musket and fire it. It was pretty loud, it was pretty impressive, and told us how quickly the Minutemen actually had to fire that. And then after that was all over, I sang some 18th century music. We had the wreath laying, that's right.
And we donated it to the church, right?
I don't even know what happened to the wreath. Is that what happened? I believe so.
Yeah. Who told me that it was donated to the church?
Anybody know where the wreath went?
It did, it came to the church.
Oh, okay. And then to end the day, we had the Reading Concert Band, which I found very relaxing because I was pooped. Alan was giving cemetery tours, and I was supposed to be going over there, and I totally forgot about it, and he said, that's all right, not too many people came over, but it was just nice to sit there and relax and listen to the Reading Concert Band. And the other volunteers, they set up the Patriots Gallery on the Common, if everybody remembers that. It was all the stories of the Patriots who mustered that day, and they had a scavenger hunt where you could answer questions and get pulled into a drawing, and Linda had all these prizes. She had called all kinds of people to get gift certificates. So that was the raffle that they ran over there, and they gave free popcorn. It's just a great time. It was a fun day. So the last thing I want to do before we have our party music is I want to introduce Bo Battey. Bo, could you kind of tell us just your story? And yeah, so Bo Battey is a descendant of Thomas Townsend, and I just want to have, he brought tonight this journal that he has. Could you just explain the journal to us?
Well, I'll start off by saying that my mother is
Well, my descendant from Thomas Townsend is, Thomas had a son named Thomas, who had a son named Rufus Emerson Townsend, who had a son named Stephen Townsend, who had a daughter named Emma Abbey Townsend, who was my grandmother. And my mother was Dorothy Carey Boyden. She died in 1984, and she had never, all the time that she was with me, had ever talked about her family. I knew nothing about the Townsends. Her grandmother, Emma, had died 3 years before I was born, so I never knew my grandmother or my grandfather. But after my mother died, as you do when a parent dies, you go through and take care of the things that they left behind. And in going through my mother's things, I found this journal. It's not in very good condition. It's kind of dilapidated and old and all that stuff. But I looked at it kind of carefully, and I was kind of surprised. I found this story about this guy named Daniel Townsend, who was with Thomas Townsend in a place surrounded by British regulars. And they were exchanging gunfire. And Thomas left the building, and Daniel stayed in the building. And then the fire got too intense, so Daniel had to leave the building. He was killed as he left the building. The next morning, again, I'm getting this just from reading the journal, Thomas took the body. Most of the people that were killed at this building were buried on site, but Thomas took Daniel back to Linfield to be with his family. Anyway, I just read that. And of course, my mother at that point was dead, so I couldn't talk to her about it or ask her about it or anything. What's really very interesting is that we're now in Linfield. My father died when I was quite young. My mother had to go back to work, and she went back to school, got a teaching certificate, and she ended up spending her entire teaching career here in Linfield. So that's a kind of an interesting connection, because I always think of Linfield as the place where my mom spent her career. And I never realized until quite recently that Linfield was the place where her great uncle was buried. So I'm not terribly knowledgeable about this, but it was fascinating for me to discover all of this. And I feel sad that I never knew about it before my mother died. So I was never able to talk to her about it. In the journal, it's obvious that Emma, my grandmother, was corresponding with the fellow that wrote the journal. Because in addition to the journal itself, it's a fascinating document, because it's all handwritten. And as my wife noticed, there's no cross-outs. I mean, this guy wrote it very eloquently, and never made a mistake.
Wow.
But he also sent some additions to Emma, my grandmother, and so evidently they stayed in communication afterwards.
Thank you. Thanks for telling us that story.